Hi everyone, it's Dan. I wanted to make a video about an interesting endgame puzzle I came across recently. It's called the Saavedra position, seen here, and even though its solution is relatively simple, it's really jam-packed with a lot of chess concepts. Forks, skewers, pins, stalemate traps, and more. The Saavedra position was named after the Spanish priest who analyzed this position and discovered that, despite everyone at the time being convinced that this was a drawn position, white could actually win with perfect play. The Saavedra position is one of the most famous endgame positions in all of chess, so without further ado, let's get to it. In this position, it's white to win and play. If you'd like to, pause the video and see if you can find the solution of this puzzle, but I'm just going to go ahead and start with it. Okay, so the only asset white has in this position is its pawn on the 6th rank. If it's going to win the game, that pawn has to push forward. So the first move is c7. And now black is in a bit of a quandary. He needs to stop the pawn, but he can't. The pawn guards the rook's access point on the 8th rank, and the king stops the rook from getting behind the pawn. So the only way for black to stop white from promoting on the next turn is to check the king with rook to d6, check. Now, white has a decision to make, and this is the first instance where precision is required, as one false step can see victory slip away. There are several squares the king can go to in order to get out of check. There's the a file, b6, b4, and c4. Only one of them will lead to a win. The others lead to either a draw or a loss. First, king to a5 is simply out because it loses on the spot since the rook gets behind the pawn, and the pawn will be lost on the next turn. Next, let's look at what happens if the white king lines up with the pawn. First, playing to the 7th rank, either a7 or b7 might seem safe, but it actually leads to a draw. If the white king tries to hide behind the pawn, rook d7 pins the pawn, and after any move by the white king, the rook just gives itself up for the pawn, and it's a draw. What perhaps might be most tempting in this position after the check is for white to play something like king to c5, attacking the rook. But if the king lines up with the pawn on the file, this allows black to play a really sneaky move to assure once again that the game will be a draw. If you'd like to try to find the move, you can pause and do so, but I'll show it to you now. The move is rook to d1, with rook c1 to follow, and the rook has successfully gotten behind the pawn. If the pawn promotes, we have this skewer, and black wins. And if instead, right here, the king just tries to move off the c-file to avoid the check, well, we still have rook to c1, and the rook will exchange itself off for the pawn, and white walks away with only a draw. So all this leaves white with only one option which doesn't immediately lose or draw the game, and that is king to b5. And now black is in the same quandary he was in on the last turn. He has to stop the pawn from promoting, but the rook can get neither in front of nor behind the pawn, so the only option is to play rook to d5, check. And white again must be precise. Moving to the a-file as before loses or draws, moving back up to b6 makes no progress and runs the risk of draw through repetition, and moving to the c-file here allows for rook to d1 and the same idea as before. So the king must move to b4. And it's the same story in fact for black and for white. Black must check, white must stay on the b-file until we move down the board and we get to this position right here. After rook to c3 check, well, now it's actually a completely different story for white. Now the king can play to the c-file, since from c2 the king is guarding d1. And now black is out of successful checks. He can do nothing to stop the pawn from promoting. However, black still has one more trick up his sleeve. If you'd like, pause the video and see if you can find here how black can try for stalemate. The move that black here can use to try to force stalemate is rook to d4, a very sneaky move. The idea here is after the pawn promotes to a queen, we have rook to c4 check. With the queen and king being forked, white has to take the rook or lose the game, but after the queen captures on c4, black is saved. It's stalemate. The queen attacks a2, and the white king guards b2 and b1, so black has no legal moves. So if rook to d4 is the move for black, what can white do in this position? So the solution here is, I think, pretty cool in its simplicity. Simply underpromote to a rook. Now if rook to c4 check, white just wins, obviously. The white rook from c4 is not attacking the a2 square, meaning the black king can move there, and in fact must move there, as that is his only legal move, but this leads to checkmate. In addition to negating the threat of rook to c4 check, The underpromotion of the pawn creates another serious threat in the position for black. Rook a8 leads to mate. So the only way to avoid this is to move the black rook to a4. But here white has only to play one more move and black can resign. That move is king to b3. This move creates two threats and black cannot parry both. First, and perhaps most obvious, the king is threatening the rook, but the king, by playing to b3, also is making way for the white rook to play to c1, which would be checkmate. In other words, black can either avoid mate, but lose the rook and eventually lose the king, or he can save the rook and lose the game immediately. So, after a very calm b3, the game ends and white has won. Now, this endgame has been around for over 100 years, and obviously a tool that chess players have at their disposal now, which they didn't back then, is computer analysis. The computer still agrees that the initial position here is a win for white. However, it found a way for black to offer more resistance, and for the sake of being thorough, I'll touch on it very briefly. From the starting position, after the pawn pushes, we still have black giving a series of checks. White stays on the b-file, but here on move 3 for black, we instead have king to b2, which allows the pawn to promote. And in this rook versus queen endgame, it's a theoretical win for white. However, the term more resistance here simply means that it will take white from this position at least 26 moves to force checkmate. Whereas in the original puzzle, there were only 7 moves until black resigned or got mated. But showing the 26 move solution is getting a little sidetracked, as a rook versus queen endgame perhaps belongs in another video. So in summary, this is the Saavedra position, a theoretical win for white. I like this puzzle a lot, since again it's full of a lot of important chess concepts. I hope you enjoyed watching and took something away from this. Questions and comments are certainly welcome. Thanks, and take care.